Okie doke. I'll do the opening statement, and then I think we can go to the administration's presentation with you. Is that it, Councilor O'Malley?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It is Monday, September 13th, 2021, and we're here today for a virtual working session, excuse me, on Docket 0775, Ordinance Amending City of Boston Code Ordinance Chapter 7, Section 7-2.1 and 7-2.1 and 7-2.2, Building Energy Reporting and Disclosure, also known as BERDO. This matter was sponsored by Councilor O'Malley and was referred to the committee on June 16, 2021. The committee held a hearing on July 22, 2021, and a working session on August 23, 2021. In accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021,
Babe,
you're modifying
you have stuff to do. You're already pushing 11.
Meeting requirements
Oh,
that allow
you could have left.
I'm sorry, could everyone mute their
You should have did that before the meeting started.
Yep.
Now it's on.
Sorry, just want to make sure that everyone's muted.
People still come in.
Okie doke.
Someone's on the phone and I don't think they realize they're not.
Yeah, I'm trying to mute everybody. I think everyone's muted. Okay. All right. Open meeting law, and it relieves us as public bodies of certain requirements, including that we have this hearing in a physically accessible place. We are instead able to do this via Zoom to allow for us to do our jobs at the same time, acknowledge the public health needs of the moment. This working session will be live streamed at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 964. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee via email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. This proposal sets emission targets, performance standards, and reporting requirements for buildings greater than or equal to 20,000 square feet. It establishes the Emissions Review Board with public input to increase accountability and transparency, and establishes an Environmental Justice Buildings Emissions Investment Fund. At the hearing, the committee heard testimony from the administration, panels of advocates, members of the Green Ribbon Commission, and comments from the public. Docket 0775 is designed to achieve equity by developing workforce opportunities and establishing the Emissions Reductions Equitable Investment Fund. The fund is designed to improve public health and affordable housing opportunities by prioritizing environmental justice, populations, and housing stabilization. Building owners have flexibility with how targets are met, which include portfolio options, individual compliance schedule, and hardship compliance plans. This is a working session, so the committee will review the specific language of the docket. Joining us today from the administration are Chief Mariama White-Hammond, Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space, and Commissioner Allison Brezius, who is from the Environmental Department. We also are joined by our Carbon Neutrality Program Manager, Hannah, who will be, Hannah Payne, who will be guiding us through the administration's presentation. Since this is a working session, the committee will review, again, just the specific language. At the last working session, the committee discussed that the purpose of the ordinance is to create clear pathways with regard to what accountability measures will be through the reporting and disclosure of emissions. Commissioner Brezius reviewed the definition sections and discussed district energy plans, Energy Star portfolio manager, and the definition of environmental justice population. The administration indicated that the intent is to keep the reporting deadline consistent moving forward. The committee discussed the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund in Section F. The committee reviewed comments received regarding the governance structure and discussed payments that would be placed in the fund. The committee discussed that payments from alternative compliance and fines from penalties going into the fund. The committee inquired about funds received from penalties and whether such fines from penalties are required to go to the general fund. I think we also discussed how high those fines could go. And I just want to, again, compliment the lead sponsor, Councilor O'Malley, on his stalwart stewardship of this legislation, not once, but twice, and helping to bring this wonderful conversation and this timely movement and moment before us today. Again, we are joined by the administration who will kick off a presentation. I want to acknowledge the extreme amount of hard work that the administration and Councilor O'Malley have done to make sure that both working sessions are as efficient as possible. Again, just reminding people this is not a time to discuss whether you like or don't like the concept of BERDO. We are going directly into the language. We're going to be sticking to the language. I think last working session, we really shrunk the haystack in terms of issues that we have to be concerned with. We are now responding to those questions and the public testimony and the letters about specific language and concerns from that working session. We do have some public testimony coming from Patricia McMullen, Patricia Baumer from Greater Boston Real Estate Board, Greg Bassel from Greater Boston Real Estate Board, and Mary Ellen O'Donnell. That's who I have so far. If you want to testify, please email christine.o'donnell@boston.gov or ccc at boston.gov. So now I'm turning it over to our guest, the lead sponsor, then Councilor Flynn for any opening remarks, then right to the administration.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will be mercifully brief. Wanted to thank you for your incredible partnership and leadership here. This is one of the most consequential and important initiatives that I put forward, that we as a council have put forward as it relates to climate, and I'm incredibly grateful of not only the partnership with the administration, but the incredible deep well of support from all colleagues. Every councilor has signed off on it. I've been so impressed and grateful for the legions of advocates, of residents who have weighed in support of this. It was wonderful to read the Boston Globe a couple weeks ago, to read a really strong editorial in support of this as well. And most importantly, the public support has been great, but I've been incredibly grateful for folks from every discipline, from every industry, who've weighed in and offered their thoughts and offered their suggestions, many of which we have not only taken into account, but will be reflected. And you will see that as we go through some of the red line changes through Commissioner Brezius and Hannah and Chief White Hammond. This is incredibly important. We no longer have the luxury of time to wait and debate this. This is going to help establish Boston not only as a national leader, but as an international leader on decarbonization. It does it right. It does it well. The easiest thing in the world, I've often said, is we could just pass these aggressive goals without a mechanism to achieve them, and it would likely pass. But this is actually a way that we're going to get it done. And I've been really grateful for the opportunity to have some really tough but productive conversations with folks in the industry, and that will continue. So thank you again for your great support. Thank you to partnership within the administration, as well as other councilors for great questions and a great working session. I will say, just to end my remarks, this has been a very good, robust process. As you mentioned, I introduced this in June. We had a hearing in July. We had our first working session in August. We also held, the Chief and I, a joint listening session, public testimony opportunity at the end of August as well, where we had close to 90 people who signed in to participate. Not all testified, but we had some really good give and take, and now a second working session as well. So I'm very grateful for this. Very robust. It's obviously a very important issue, and it deserves the level of oversight that we're doing right now. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for looking forward to a good working session.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for your important leadership, Councilor Edwards, on this issue. And a special thank you to my colleague, Councilor O'Malley, who really spent his career working on these critical, important issues, and just want to acknowledge the professionalism of Councilor O'Malley and his team. I will be very brief. I just wanted to relay one story. On Sunday, I was with my wife at the Beacon Hill Festival, and there was a booth set up, and we saw mothers out front, and we had an opportunity to talk to some of the women about actually this proposal. And you know, these advocates have also worked closely with Councilor O'Malley and his team and the administration's team, Reverend Hammond White. Thank you for the incredible work of your team as well. So it's Councilor O'Malley and the City Council and the Mayor's office and the administration, but also the advocates and everyday people that want to see environmental justice in our city. So thank you, Councilor O'Malley, for including everybody and, more important, listening to everybody, their point of view. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have now been joined by Councillor Kinsey Bach. We are just right on time for your opening statement. Councillor Bach.
I've been here. I just didn't have my camera on.
I'm sorry.
But thank you. No, Madam Chair. I mean, thanks to you and to Councillor O'Malley on this. It's such a huge thing. And I'll just echo Councillor Flynn in saying that, you know, there's been a lot of work that has gone into this from advocates, from our environmental department, and of course from our president pro tem and in his leadership. And so I'm remain, as I said, I think at the prior ones of this, just excited to support this and glad that, you know, that we're in the weeds, but just really want to underscore that it's been a long time coming, and that frankly, you know, we all know that we're behind the 8 ball when it comes to the things that we need to do in this world, country, and city to address the climate crisis. So there's, you know, no time like the present. So just thanks so much, and happy to be here.
Okay, we'll now turn it over to you, Chief, and the administration to work, you know, present with Councilor O'Malley.
Great, and I will be brief. I do want to echo, just really glad that we are able to come together. It's been a great collaborative process between the administration and the council and industry groups and advocacy groups. And really, I think we are getting close to the finish line. I think we'll be presenting a little bit about sort of how we are incorporating the feedback that we've heard. We thank everyone for there were lots and lots of extensive ideas, not all in alignment with each other. And so we've tried our best to sort of take all of what we heard and incorporate that in a way that we think keeps the integrity of this and also incorporate some of that feedback. I think it feels really good to be so united on this. I was recently in a call with other sustainability, climate folks across the country, and it felt really good to say how we in Boston are working together to make this happen. I really do believe that this ordinance not just will help Boston to be strong, not just will it make us catch up with and hopefully down the line beat New York in leadership on this, but I also think we are setting a tone for the rest of the country in ways that will help prevent the possibility that all of us end up in a dinghy together in the Boston Harbor trying to figure out how to hold on. I think the time for action is now, and I'm really grateful for the way that folks have come together to make this possible. So I will hand it over to the staff to sort of walk through what we've heard, how we've incorporated it, and still protecting the integrity and recognizing that, you know, different groups have had different perspectives, sometimes in the opposite of each other. But I hope we've done the best that we could to, again, get us to the carbon neutrality of 2050, while also trying to hear folks' concerns and see how we can balance those suggestions. So really grateful to be here, and let's dig in.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you, Councillor Edwards, Councillor O'Malley, Councillors Flynn and Bach. It's good to see you all again here today. In the previous working session, we discussed each section of the proposed amendment to BERDO and the feedback we've received about them. We've made some of the proposed changes based on that discussion, which you'll see in the redlined version of the ordinance that is on the screen today. There were also a handful of sections, as Councillor Edwards mentioned, that we believed warranted a further discussion that we're going to dig into specifically today. The review board, the equitable emissions investment fund, and the renewable energy certificate section specifically. We've also proposed a number of other changes that clarify sections, including the roles of the board, the APCC, and the city, and some fixes to some minor typos. So if we could scroll down, again, no changes to the purpose. In section B here in definitions, these are two changes that we had discussed in the last working session to add a definition of an alternative compliance payment and to bring the discussion of a building portfolio into a specific definition in the definition section and move it out of the section on blended emissions so that it was decoupled from that. If you could keep scrolling. We also, per the discussion last time, amended the definition of carbon dioxide equivalent. And then we had a minor change here in the definition of a community-based organization. Councillor O'Malley, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, just briefly, thanks to Christine O'Donnell, our legal counsel. Just it allows us to make sure that we are truly able to have representatives from the community as part of as an integral part of this. So it's again just a minor change that will allow us to live up to the spirit of this ordinance or of this amendment.
Thank you. If no further thoughts on that, moving on to the definition of environmental justice population. Here we added a little bit of text at the end to say as defined in the regulations. This was speaking to the discussion we had with Councilors Edwards and Flynn, particularly highlighting that we may want to be able to explore adding air quality criteria in the future. So that will allow us to do that if we come up with criteria that would suit there during that process. If you want to keep going. I believe other than minor typos here of section and subsection, that's the only additional here is that we added a definition of verification year to add clarity to the discussion of data verification later in the ordinance. And then here again, we added a new section that pulls building portfolios out of the definition of blended emissions. This isn't changing the text, it's just pulling it out into its own new separate section. If you'd keep scrolling. Again, here in section E, there's no changes here, but making in subsection A the definition consistent with the definition of emissions factors above. So that's already addressed above, so no need to duplicate. And then if we go down to section D, this was the discussed change on the material terms of a power purchase agreement instead of the full contract details. Keep on scrolling. Again, here, this was the discussion in the section on our definitions and our reporting deadlines. We were discussed in the last time moving to maintaining consistency in the reporting so that all buildings reported in the same year at the same time, but understanding that in the first year, more time might be needed to do outreach to building owners. So allowing for extension of the reporting deadline in the first year, but maintaining that consistency for all future years.
And that one-time 6-month extension, to be clear,
Yeah.
it isn't given willy-nilly. It still has to be applied. There has to be a
yes,
reason.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, you would still apply for it, but if you need it, it's there if you're just coming into reporting and need a little more time to understand the requirements.
Commissioner, before you continue, could you
Absolutely.
quickly, sorry, I'm not sure if Christine O'Donnell has a copy of the red line. Do you mind if someone
Jessica, is that?
I've sent it to Christine, Councillor.
Yeah,
Perfect,
Counselor,
thank
sorry, I just got it.
So
Okay.
apologies, Christine. I'm sorry. I should have gotten that to you earlier. We just finished this up right before we started, so my apologies. That's on me.
So would all the counselors be from Christine? We'll all get a copy to follow along too. I mean, we're doing this now. Just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
If that's the proper, we can share it, Chair Edwards, or if it's better to come through Christine, whatever.
I think Christine will go ahead and do it. I just wanted to make sure. Sorry to stop you, Commissioner.
No,
Thank you.
glad everyone has a copy. Okay, again, no changes in direct upload, which brings us to one of the areas that we wanted to discuss in more depth today, which is the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. So this would set up an investment fund as a separate fund that would be funded by the alternative compliance payments. The review board would be responsible for evaluating proposals and making recommendations for expenditures from the fund. And the expenditures will fund local carbon reduction projects within Boston, prioritizing environmental justice populations. The section also states that the further conditions for expenditure of the fund may be developed in the regulations related to economic inclusion, housing stability, air quality improvements, and other priorities for equitable implementation. Based on a lot of discussion and feedback that we received over the last several weeks, we've made a few proposed red lines here to further clarify that language. And I don't know, Councillor,
Sure.
Councillor O'Malley, would you like to jump in here?
Yes, thanks, Allison. So adding, just building before carbon abatement project shows what we truly want to prioritize. I think we all agree that was brought up at the last working session. Again, underscoring emissions reduction goals. I'm sorry, for those looking, I'm reading, this is in subsection F. On the second paragraph, money in the fund shall be expended. We added building, you can see it's red, emissions reduction goal. And then it's just the way we phrase it. Fund expenditures shall prioritize public projects that benefit EJ populations and populations disproportionately affected by air pollution. And that, again, was some good feedback from the chair as well as Councillor Flynn at the last working session, talking about the air pollution. And then we just go through, as we had the bullet points are the same, other than adding equitable before workforce development training, just that adjective or that qualifier. And then the next paragraph, the regulations will address conditions for expenditure, which may include but are not limited to the scale of anticipated emissions reductions, compliance with employment and contracting standards, living wage standards, language access, rent stabilization, air quality monitoring and improvements, housing stability, disclosure of compliance status and mechanisms to tenants. Wanted to make sure we included that as well as, and we just changed from transparency to compliance with fair housing standards. I think that was a legal note that we were, just changed that word again, just to make sure that it was clear and understandable. Did I leave anything out, Allison?
No, I would just note that we received several other additional comments suggesting that we either change the governance of the fund or expand it further to include many more and larger buildings. We were concerned that that would fundamentally change the intention of the fund.
Yes, agreed. So any questions? Yeah, any questions from we're going to go through it, but there are this is the first of sort of three buckets that we didn't get into too much specificity. So is there any, Madam Chair, through you, any questions through the other councilors on this?
Not for me. Again, thank you for your clarifications. Councillor Bach, Councillor Flynn?
No questions from me.
Dynamite.
Okay.
I know Councillor Braden's joined us as well, Madam Chair.
Apologies, Councillor Braden. Didn't know if you had any brief opening or any, we're just going literally through the questions that we had last time at the last working session.
No, no, thank you. I don't have any questions at this time, and I'm just following along. I'm very excited that this is coming to fruition, so keep on rocking there.
Okay.
Okay.
Want to start with data verification now?
Absolutely. Moving right along. So these, again, were just clarifying the language, but not changing the intent here to align the, basically move the verification deadline to be consistent with the reporting deadline. So you weren't reporting demonstrating compliance with an emission standard or paying an alternative compliance payment, and then having 6 months before your data verification is complete and having to correct. We felt it would be cleaner for all involved if those dates were aligned. And then just clarifying the language that data verification again would happen in the first year, and then in the first years that the performance standards come into effect or tighten, and they would be for that year and the prior 5 years of the period. So happy to go into more detail if the language seems still unclear.
Just to be clear, C was struck because it's clarified in B?
It's actually brought up into B. We didn't think there was a need to have a separate, it's brought into the definition of verification year. So it didn't need to be its separate standalone, but it didn't change the meaning of the section.
Right.
So I'm getting a few messages that folks are struggling to see the screen. I just wanted to highlight that for folks. On the YouTube, they said that the screen is blurry and they're unable to read it.
Do you think you can, whoever's there's the screen that's being shared, maybe it can be enhanced?
Maybe zoomed in a little bit. Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, that's 125, maybe 150 or something. Yeah.
Just wanted to pause so folks could.
That might be helpful.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll try with this. It might be the scrolling too, takes a minute to catch up. Yeah. Okay, on to section I. Again, this was just consistency with the definition and the regulations. It's not changing the material terms, but those factors will be defined in the regulations. Section J. And here, this is moving subsection 2 into subsection 1 so that they're all a single section, and that because portfolios now have their own standalone definition. So this is just an edit for clarity after that definition was created. Okay, energy use exempt from emissions requirements. Here in subsection 2, we've added or EVS. So the section reads electric vehicle supply equipment is separately metered, and we've added or EVSE is capable of tracking and reporting accurate energy use, and EVSE meets specifications as defined in the regulations. This would mean that a electric vehicle wouldn't be required to be attached to a separate meter, which could be a higher barrier, as long as we can specify a methodology for tracking and verifying that electric vehicle supply equipment's data.
Right now, if you, Commissioner, right now, if you were to request from a utility company to separate the charger from sort of your the rest of your electricity, would they be able to do that?
I think it very much depends on, I mean, they would, my understanding is that they would come and look, and in many instances they would be able to separately meter, but they wouldn't always, or there could be an additional cost on the building for that additional meter.
Okay.
So I will say, having had a slight experience with this also with solar, it is, again, depending on how long ago your system was wired, how it was wired, it can create some challenges. There is not always the priority one might want from the utility company to move it, because it's not really a huge difference for them. So I think, again, this allows people to take that into their own hands by installing a system, which they could do probably much more quickly. So I think, if you're installing it and your system is easy, then you can do it. But I do know of an instance where some folks were caught quite a while in waiting for it to be prioritized.
Gotcha. That's helpful.
And then in section I, that is not actually struck. It's simply moved lower on the page into its own subsection. So for clarity, And then if you scroll down to the final paragraph, Councilor O'Malley, did you want to speak to the healthcare?
Yeah,
backup
this is
generation?
just, this is talking to some of our friends in the healthcare industry. This is the sort of allowing for backup generation, which oftentimes is needed for accreditation. I toured Children's Hospital with some folks, saw their backup room. Again, it's the type of thing that is the last sort of plan that we should use. But with the healthcare industry, they often have that flywheel energy as sort of that quick bridge, and then this could be used only in absolute emergencies. But we want to be sensitive to the healthcare, particularly our hospitals, to allow for that. So that's just making that clear specifically for healthcare and needing accreditation.
Okay, so if there are no questions there, in section K, no changes are proposed. In section L, the hardship compliance plans added some minor clarifying language so that, measure that hardship compliance plans could include measures related to these areas, and adding benefit sharing, not just energy cost sharing, as one of the features that was named by some folks as a desire to promote cost savings sharing and other issues. Think of a solar panel where the energy could be shared with the tenants potentially if the structure is set up correctly. And then some clarifying language around what tenant transparency meant, but no other changes here. And then we move into section M, additional compliance mechanisms, a minor clarification based on the fact that municipal aggregation has multiple rates, not just a base rate and a higher rate. Correction of the bundled typo we addressed in the last working session. And that brings us to our second discussion point, which is renewable energy certificates. Councilor?
Yes, sorry, 1 second. So this is just, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Oh, we're in the rec section. We're having our deeper discussion on recs.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is, we are allowing, fixing the unbundled recs, changing certificates to credits, going through the sort of what is allowed, and I'm sorry, I'm not.
That's okay. So here
I'll let you take this, Allison. I was off on something.
So here again, we have heard a number of comments, many asking us to broaden the definition of allowable recs, and many asking us to further strengthen it. And so I think, at least for the beginning of this discussion, we've landed in the middle with leaving it as is in terms of the allowable recs.
Yep. That's right. Yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay. But councilors, if you have any desire to discuss this section further.
No.
Okay. So moving on. We can keep going.
Real quick question.
Sure.
I think in the power purchasing agreements, I had asked about, is this like a cap and trade? Do you remember that question?
So I vaguely, but if you could expand on it, Councilor.
I mean, I had asked, and this is something maybe I can talk with the Councilor O'Malley about, that we weren't setting up a cap and trade where there's a certain amount that they could be, okay. And I think you guys clarified that. Just thank you so much.
Yeah, that is something that was explored but was not added.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Keep scrolling. Again, this is minor updates 2014 to 2022 for the dates that of distribution, and then we move into the bottom of section P here. And in section P, we really just tried to clarify some of the reporting requirements for the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. These are changes we discussed the last time, where that we would clarify that we would, for transparency, issue annual reports on the fund, including administrative costs, review board compensation, other liabilities expended from the fund, and make sure that we were following the accessibility and language guidelines for the city. So I think this was in response to both a Better City and Councilor Mejia's good suggestions. So then on to section Q are, so no changes to Q other than a clarification that violations would first go to the review board, not directly to the commission. And then
in number 6, what's the Mass General? Why did we cite MGL Chapter 111?
That was cited above, and this went to Councilor Edwards's question about our finding authorities. That was just brought down. It was issued earlier. That is, I can look up the exact section, but it has to do with public health boards and commissions and the ability to regulate air pollution and environmental pollution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent.
And then if we keep going down to section S, we get to the main topic of discussion for the day, which would be the emissions review board.
Yes. So I'll take it from here. Commission for this. So we came down on the number of a 9-member independent review board, which will be appointed by the mayor and approved by the council. Members of the review board shall have expertise in, and this is what we're hoping. These are obviously, I wouldn't say broad. I think they're pretty specific, but what we're aiming to do here is have 9 members, one with particular expertise in environmental justice, second, affordable housing, third, labor and workers' rights, fourth, workforce development, 5, building engineering and energy, 6, real estate development and management, 7, public health and hospitals, 8, architecture and historic preservation. We left the sort of caveat or combination thereof. And then that 9th seat would be the chair of the committee's Boston City Council's Environment, Resiliency, and Parks Committee, or their designee shall fill in that 9 spot. So that gives us a 9-member body. We think it's robust enough to really cover some important areas, while at the same time not being completely unwieldy and having a 30-person board, which I don't think would be able to get it. Obviously wanted to keep it at an odd number, and it allows for that. And I know this has been a topic of conversation. We've given it a lot of thought, a lot of sort of good, thinking and what was, again, aspirational and achievable. I think this makes sense. We're keeping with the 2/3 of the members of the review board shall be nominated by community-based organizations, and all members shall be current residents of the city of Boston. So there will be a residency requirement for members who serve on the board. 2/3 of the members shall be nominated by the CBOs. And again, it will have that expertise. And I think that's been sort of a crucial point that, I just want to reiterate is that CBOs are obviously more than capable of working to nominate members of this board with this relevant expertise, which will make it both robust, diverse, and Boston residents. So I'm very excited about this. That's sort of where we came down. If we, continue to read that paragraph, and then I'll stop for questions. Regulations shall designate community groups and organizations to nominate individuals to serve on the review board, subject to the mayor's appointment and the council's approval. Members of the review board for whom participation is not part of a full-time or part-time job may request compensation for their service on the review board, and the regulation shall establish a rate of compensation per meeting and a cumulative compensation per year. Some boards offer compensation, others don't. Again, there will be a significant amount of work, particularly in the initial days of this board. And I wanted to make sure that we're able to allow folks for whom this isn't their full-time job to be able to be a part of it if necessary. And this will be one thing that's more fleshed out during the regulations, both in terms of the community groups and organizations to nominate individuals to serve on the review board. Again, that nominates them to sort of go before the mayor and the council. So there's a number of steps in the process, and that will also establish a rate of compensation per meeting. So that's sort of a quick overview on the review board. Happy to, Madam Chair, through you, take any questions from colleagues.
So Councillor O'Malley, I know, just jumping in, some of the questions was, so if it's a 9-member board where I believe you have made sure that because of the compensation, there will be, I think, community members, regardless of their income level, regardless of whether they're working full-time or part-time. That's incredible. I know your commitment and your heart that, you know, all the board's meetings would be bilingual or at least have an interpreter there. I know. I'm just, and I also wanted to make sure then of those folks and those roles defined, will community organizations be able to put forward suggestions to the mayor, I suppose it is, who would then come to the city council?
Oh, without question, community-based organizations will be, will be working collectively and collaboratively to help nominate 2/3 of the members of the review board.
Might I, and this is not done normally, this might be more of changing how the way we do business in general. I don't know when the meetings are. I'm assuming they might be in the evening. And if we can look to that, and I say that also, we haven't done it before. I would love to know that we start doing it here if we're going to talk about environmental, racial justice. Is there any way to provide access to the child care center and child care at all during some of these meetings?
So again, I think I agree with all of that.
This is not BERDO specific. It's more, community.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Well, let me actually finish, and I should have done this, finish reading this. The answer is yes. And
Awesome.
Members shall serve for a 3-year term. As the term expires, the successor or their renewal shall be nominated by the organizations identified in the regulations and appointed again by the mayor with the council's approval. I think that's important. Vacancies in the review board shall be filled by the mayor subject to council approval for the unexpired term. And every 3 years, the mayor shall designate a member to be the chair of the review board. Review board shall meet a minimum of 4 times per year and may meet more often as it deems necessary to fulfill its obligations, which I believe it will, particularly initially, meet more than quarterly. And I'm going to get to working groups in a second. But suffice it to say, when we get into the regulations, that's probably the more appropriate time to say this board will meet, let's say, in the evening, or and certainly allow for childcare and translation. And I would venture a guess that they'll be probably meeting remotely, as many mayoral appointed boards are, at least initially. So that should also allow for greater participation. But I think those are all great points that we will absolutely make sure are crystal clear when we get into the more of the specific regulations.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn, Councillor Braden.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I have a question for Councillor O'Malley, and maybe he covered this already and I just didn't hear it. So I apologize. But Councillor O'Malley, the members of this board, do they receive a stipend?
So they can apply for a stipend. So someone like the chair of, whomever succeeds me in the role of chair of the Environment Committee will get a spot. He or she will not get a stipend, but there will be an opportunity for individuals to apply for a stipend. And I wanted to thank members of the community and sort of Allison who flagged that for me, because I think it's important. We offer stipends for certain mayoral and council appointed boards, but not others. This would allow that, and in the regulations, they'll determine what it will be. You're not going to get rich. It's not going to be a full-time job. It's not going to be a part-time job. But certainly to allow for folks who, taking a half a day off of work is going to be a financial impact. We want to make sure that we're able to offer some support. So that's important that we included that in the language, and the regulations will determine what the rate of pay would be. I would venture a guess that Clerk Feeney might be able to sort of give us a number, which, in terms of what sort of the relevant prevailing but good wage would be or stipend would be to support folks.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. That was the only question I had, and I agree. You know, a stipend should be offered. So thank you, Councilor O'Malley, for that answer.
Great.
The other question I had was, will there be just in terms of turnover in your on the board, will you have staggered renewals, or will the whole board be changed every 3 years? And also, will there be term limits in the sense that you want to turn over and have opportunities for new faces on the board as well?
Yeah, that's a great question, Liz. So the short answer is that we wrote it in such a way that they wouldn't be staggered appointments. That's something that I think we could probably flush that out more in the regulation phase. I know, for example, we're doing the police review board, and that does have sort of this, even though folks will be nominated en masse initially, there will be sort of staggered terms on top of that, similar to what we did with CPA. If councilors feel strongly that that's important, I'm happy to include that. I don't know that we'd need it necessarily as an amendment to this before we vote on it, but again, I'm open to that. I think the regs could maybe flush that out.
Yeah.
I didn't include term limits. And I don't think if we have some all-star who's, I wouldn't want to limit his or her or their ability to serve. And I think just having the fact that there would be renewals and there's sort of that two-pronged approach of having both the mayoral appointment having three-pronged approach, sort of the nomination, the mayoral appointment, and the council, we wouldn't necessarily need term limits in that way. But again, I'm open to it. Fundamentally, I don't think we need it, but if folks feel strongly, I'm happy to see if we can figure out something that works.
Councilor O'Malley, we did talk about that a little bit internally, and I think these regulations give us, this ordinance does give us some flexibility, and we could go deeper in the regulations. So you see that there's their renewal that was added because it wasn't clear if it was one term and then you were done. So renewal gave that option, and I think that we could go into greater depth. But I think this encapsulates both the intention that folks would serve for 3 years, but it doesn't mean that they only have to serve for 3 years. And I think this question of staggering and other things we could take up in another conversation, because I do think it could be advantageous to not have all of the knowledge leave potentially at the same time. So maybe that, but I think I agree with Councilor O'Malley that we should really look at that as a regulations. I think the meat of it, the good overarching is here, but we could go into greater detail if we want to in the regulations.
Yeah, agreed. No, thank you, Chief. Anything else, Lizzie?
That's all for the moment. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know, is Kenzie still here? She may have popped off.
I'm good on this section.
Okay.
You want to continue?
Great. So the next section is, this specifically came up with a number of folks in the healthcare field. I'm sorry, can you just scroll up? Yeah, right there. So this is one thing that we're adding, and I want to be crystal clear about this, is in addition to the review board, which has the statutory authority to really make sure that this ordinance works, we are going to allow for a working group which may be convened to study or make recommendations for regulations changes or sector-specific criteria for hardship compliance plans, subject to the approval of the review board. A working group will be convened to address the specific needs of healthcare institutions connected to district energy systems. Working groups may include individuals not on the review board, including representatives of appropriate federal, state, and local agencies and authorities, sector-specific professionals, financial institution representatives, energy providers, and utility representatives, among others. So the review board has the power, but this is going to codify what is going to, quite frankly, happen whether we include this language or not. And we've already seen it with some of the working groups who've been very much a part of these discussions and these deliberations. But it would certainly allow for a working group, particularly as it relates to healthcare, to work and offer some additional expertise to the board. But make no mistake, the review board is the organization that has the power, has the statutory power to implement this. But we certainly would allow working group. And the fact that, as I've said all along, we want this to work. This is an aggressive but achievable. It's not its own ordinance, it's an amendment, but we'll call it an ordinance. And we want to make sure that we not only have buy-in from every sector, but we have a collaborative approach to making it happen and to decarbonizing our buildings. So that's why we included that specific language on working group. Next line, review board may draft regulation revisions and may issue guidance to the Environment Department to ensure equitable implementation of this subsection. Funding, capacity building, and staff support shall be provided to the review board by the Environment Department. The Environment Department shall also be responsible for annual disclosure and policy administration and carry out enforcement actions as directed by the review board. The review board may delegate responsibilities such as, but not limited to, the approval of requests for blended emission standards and individual compliance schedules to the Environment Department. I'm reading this isn't a change, but I'm reading this to just underscore the fact that we counselors, and I will not be a counselor come January, so the counselors working on next year's budget have to make sure that there is adequate funding for Commissioner Brezius and Chief Whitehammond and their team to make sure that we do this right. Everyone I know has said that, but I think this is crucial because there's going to be a lot of work, particularly in the early stages, for the Environment Department. We want to make sure that we're able to support them every way we can. So I think that's about it for the review board. If you want to, any other questions on that, either the working group or some of the funding, Madam Chair?
I don't have anything. I think this is excellent, but just to make sure I am clear, because that's what I had to do a lot of. This has a lot to do with requests from specific sectors that already had certain standards put on them for their emissions, like the healthcare sector. I think we talked about hospitals, for example, Councilor O'Malley.
Yep.
And what this is doing is setting a baseline for everybody, no matter what. And if there are going to be exceptions to the rule, because there's already certain standards to meet, this working group is going to be defining what they are, and then the review board would ultimately vote on it. Yes?
I wouldn't even say the working group will define what they are. I think they would certainly offer that added expertise for the review board's deliberations. The review board is going to be the final arbiter, but the working group, we want to make this as ecumenical a process as possible and include as many people and make sure that we have the relevant experts, particularly as it relates to healthcare and hospitals specifically. Excellent.
This is just such a creative way of making sure that we have a growing, because you know what I think, there's going to be, as we grow in the society and the state and federal government, likely sectors will be added and be given different standards. And so this working group will be able to constantly monitor as standards are changing. So this is an excellent addition. So thank you for that.
And it already exists. I mean, you know, we've had many conversations with Masco and other institutions of the LMA. I mean, these already exist. So this is just another way to include and make sure that we're doing this right. We're doing this effectively. But appreciate that feedback.
No more questions from me. This is really exciting. Sorry, shouldn't be that biased. I'm neutral, but this is really exciting.
Awesome.
Chair Edwards, if I may, I'd like to ask a question to Councilor O'Malley.
Go ahead, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you. So, Councilor O'Malley, I just want to make sure that during the budget process that we engage with the mayor's team, will we be certain that adequate funding will be provided in the budget for the commission?
I mean, I think that you know, we can never be certain, but I think that the broad-based support that this that this ordinance and, quite frankly, the Environment and Energy Cabinet has shown, and the relevancy and the need would indicate that whomever the next mayor is will fund it, and I am hopeful that it is someone that we know, and certainly we knows the importance. But clearly, to answer your question, it's going to be incumbent on all councilors next year to really lobby the mayor hard to make sure that this is well funded. And again, given the fact that every major mayoral candidate has been very supportive of this change, I'm hopeful that they will recognize the fact that there will be some cost, especially initially. As things move on, it probably will be less of a concern, but there will be some significant startup costs.
Well,
Which will more than be, which will, for those watching at home, one of the reasons why I say every environmentalist should be every fiscal conservative ought to be an environmentalist, because where there will be some cost in implementing this from a sort of regulatory overboard, the savings that we will see as a city are, incalculable at this point.
Well, thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Thank you for that answer, and I agree with you. It is important for all of us as city councilors to make sure we weigh in during the budget process with the mayor's team that this is an important board and deserves to be funded. So I'm going to make sure that I continue working with my colleagues during the budget process in the mayor's office to make sure that this is fully funded.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Liz B, anything from you, or shall we finish it up?
No, I think having an idea in terms of budgeting, how much this board will require in terms of financial support, I think that's really important to have that really addressed and put out front, so that when we go into the budget, we won't be quibbling about the extra money or whatever. So I agree with Councillor Flynn on that. It's really important to fund these initiatives and make sure that they're successful.
Well said. Great.
I can just say that from our perspective here at the department, we've sort of said that we plan to spend a chunk of time in December really mapping it out and getting clear, having some conversations with other folks in the country and other parts of the country who've done some of this, just so that we can get a clear sense of what is required. So we will also take some responsibility for doing some of the research and making a proposal. We'll all see what things look like by that time, but I hope that we'll be able to continue to maintain some of the good communication that we have through this process, so that we can all be on the same page, and at least we can be transparent as to what we understand it would take to make this work.
Wonderful. Well, I think that was the biggest sort of chunk on the review board. Do you want to close it out, Commish, on section T?
Yeah, we can make it quick. There aren't any other major changes, just some minor typos for the remaining sections. So I think we're done if there are no other questions.
I'm excited. I don't know that there are folks who, I know I mentioned that there was going to be some public testimony. If those folks who intend to testify could raise their hand very briefly. Again, I'll remind them that this is a working session, so your testimony needs to be dedicated to the language, not so much whether you agree or disagree. I see one person has raised their hand. As that person could go ahead and, I think, what is Sophia from ACE? Sophia?
Thank you.
The audio is not very good, Sophia. You want to log out and log back in? Okay. I gave one of the best speeches of my life, and I was mute the whole time. So let me just repeat what I said the whole time. What I said, if you're going to let Sophia come back in, and she'll testify because we couldn't hear her very well. I have not heard, no one else raised their hand, so she'll be the final public testimony. I do want to thank again Councillor O'Malley and the administration for their incredible amounts of work that allowed for this to be, again, one of the most efficient working sessions, and to have this incredible conversation. I think Sophia is not on yet, but after Sophia speaks, we'll have all the councillors do concluding remarks. I think she is now. We'll bring her over. And then we will conclude today's working session after she speaks and we do concluding remarks. Bring her over. Okay. Sophia?
Yes, is that better?
Much better.
Great, sorry about that. My Wi-Fi in my apartment is not the greatest. If you just give me 1 second. So I just wanted to say thank you to Councillor O'Malley, to you, Councillor Edwards, and to the team from the city for all of your support for this important ordinance, and really championing the provisions that we've worked on to make sure that as we're addressing emissions, we're really centering environmental justice. I just wanted to touch briefly on the questions that were raised around the environmental justice population definition in the last working session. And I'm going to share written testimony that includes all of this, but just to say that the definition of an environmental justice population that we arrived at for the ordinance is almost identical to the one that is in the recently passed roadmap law on the state level. And since 2019, a number of advocates from the environmental justice table participated in discussions with a variety of stakeholders about how an EJ population should be defined and which demographics we should include. And we did a significant amount of research and had some discussions with not only our own members, but residents, academics, and lawyers with expertise on this. And where we landed was we understand the desire to include health-related metrics like asthma rates or the impact of air pollution, but we concluded that incorporating criteria focused on community vulnerabilities actually has the potential to create additional disparities. And we talked a lot about this with Professor Marcos Luna from Salem State, who did a really extensive analysis to map where in Massachusetts the environmental benefits and burdens currently exist and their proximity to communities of color, individuals with limited English proficiency, and low-income neighborhoods. And he found that throughout Massachusetts, an individual's race acts as a proxy for the health indicators that likely would be included in the definition. And this shouldn't be news to any of us, right? So we know studies have shown locally, statewide, and nationally that there's a connection between race and proximity to pollution and to health disparities, including poor air quality, respiratory illness, and increased mortality rates from COVID-19 and other illnesses. And as we've seen from the varying rates of infection and mortality between neighborhoods within the city of Boston with COVID, this logic applies on the city level. So we also had several concerns just in terms of the data of adding health metrics to a definition, just because a lot of the data is not available at the neighborhood level. And so we would be relying on municipality level data, which means that it could potentially be both over and under inclusive. And there's also some concerns with relying on data collection that's rooted in implicit bias. And there's been some reporting on this with respect to COVID in terms of the gaps in enforcement of blood level testing mandates, and a lack of sufficiently granular data. And then the last concern that we had was that requiring populations to meet a threshold for the health disparities that we're trying to address is actually reactive and not preventative. So that's how we arrived at the definition that we did, which is based on race, income, and a combination of race and income and limited English proficiency. So I just wanted to highlight that background for you as you consider voting to support this definition and maintaining that as it is in the draft. And I'll send along a written version of this testimony that includes links to all of the studies that I've referenced and some of the articles as well.
So you're, just to summarize, you have some concerns with the additions of the health disparities. I just want to make sure you don't, did you want the original then definition?
We would support the original definition. Okay. We're not opposed to the idea of, the consideration of the health disparities as they relate to environmental justice. And I think that's important for the purview of the projects with the review board, for example. But as far as the specific, the definition itself goes, we would support the original definition as drafted.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you. So Patricia McMullen had also raised her hand. Patricia?
Thank you, Counselor. Can you hear me okay?
You're good. Mm-hmm.
Great. I hadn't planned on testifying today, but I'm really grateful to be able to join you to really thank you all. This has been an incredible process. And I will say, on behalf of the Conference of Boston Teaching Hospitals, the hospitals have been extraordinarily engaged in this. We've read every word. There's a very strong commitment to making this work. And we really appreciate all of your hearing us on our concerns. We're very happy that the working group is included in this final version. So I really want to thank Councillor O'Malley, Councillor Edwards, all of you who are here today, and the commissioner in particular. It's an extraordinary amount of work to write a statute this complicated and to navigate, so many different opinions. So I really just want to thank you all, and we're very excited to work with you in the future.
Thank you so much. Martin Roeder, and then we'll probably conclude shortly thereafter. Martin?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Well, I'd like to join with everybody else in saying how impressed I am by this whole process. I'd like to pick up on something that occurred to me, a remark by Councillor O'Malley about the tremendous amount of work that would be involved in getting this whole process going, and drawing your attention to something that has occurred to me because of a number of interactions I've had with applicants for buildings, new buildings or renovation buildings that are currently under review or have recently been approved. And unfortunately, these applicants have refused to provide enough information, or really any information, to enable us to tell whether in fact they will meet the requirements of BERDO 2.0 when they become required to do so. So that raises the question of, once BERDO 2.0 is enacted, what information should be provided to potential buyers and renters of space in buildings that will be subject to its provisions? Who will be liable for the costs and other consequences of a building's failing to meet these performance standards within a short time after the sale or during the term of a lease? I think this is important because presumably at the beginning, some people may not be aware of BERDO 2.0. Hopefully this will disappear in a while. But meanwhile, some people may sign up to buy space in a building or to rent it for a considerable period of time, and then find within a fairly short period, that they're faced with being asked to pay for additional costs or possibly suffer disruption if there has to be a major retrofit that they were not anticipating. So I think there should be some requirement for transparency in the information that's provided by an owner of a building that is trying to sell and rent space within a few years, to make sure that we don't get into a situation in which everybody starts pointing the finger at each other and says, well, if there is a problem here or cost to be borne, it's up to you to bear it, not me. Having said that, I certainly hope that this process will proceed and be as successful as it must be and enable Boston to establish itself as, I think, among the leaders in attempts to make serious steps to combat the foreseeable horrible consequences of climate warming. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues for any concluding remarks. We'll start with Councillor Flynn and Councillor Braden, and then we'll go to the lead sponsor.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I will be very brief as I gave an opening statement. I just want to highlight the work of Councillor O'Malley, Councillor Edwards, and all of my colleagues on the City Council, working professionally and cooperatively with the Mayor's office, the Mayor's team, and with residents across the city. Boston works best when we work together, and that's exactly what we saw during this process. Thank you, Councillor O'Malley, and thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank all involved with this incredible process. I keep saying that we're like 5 minutes off midnight, and this is exactly the sort of bold initiative that we need to be taking to aggressively address climate change and also to lead. Boston very often leads from the front on many big issues, and I think we're demonstrating once again that we are leading. And I want to thank Councillor O'Malley for his leadership in this space. And this is definitely your part of your legacy when you leave City Hall in January. So thank you so much for your dedication and leadership. And thank you all for the great work here.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, friends. This is tremendous. And again, wanted to thank the Environment Department and particularly Commissioner Brezius, who's been our quarterback from day one. As I said, you know, we could have passed these sort of goals and it would have passed, and the mayor would have signed it, and it would have been aspirational, but it wouldn't have detailed how we get there. And what I'm so proud of with this ordinance before us, or with this amendment before us, is that it is absolutely aggressive in our goals, but it's even more than that, it's achievable. And I've been so gratified for the number of individuals who've reached out to support it. Those who weren't quite ready to support it, but wanted to have some clarification or make sure that their voices were heard. And we've had countless conversations over the last 3 months. And I'm just really grateful and proud to each and every one of you for our collective work together. This is incredibly important. We don't have any time to waste or to wait. And we will again do something that is going to protect this city and protect generations of Bostonians to come. So I'm just so grateful for the work. This has been wonky. This has been really in the weeds, but it's the type of important initiative that deserves nothing less. So I'm looking forward to continued partnership and a strong implementation. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, colleagues.
Very well. With that, we are going to end today's working session. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I look forward to moving this as speedily as possible. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.